The only exception to that would be where there's been email used to collaboration with somebody externally or potentially a service offering or something that on sharing the email is the goal. But I don't ever want you to originate an email around leadership, because what I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to get you to lean in here, because no good news comes by email. Nothing, ever.
Hey, welcome back to the Scale My Clinic podcast. Today I'm with Todd, and today we're going to be talking about one of the key relationships in a practice is between owner and manager. When it works well, then we see practices thrive, projects get completed, and growth and all the benefits of growth and success come our way and to our team's way. When it doesn't go right, it can be incredibly frustrating for all involved. And so, Todd, today we're going to dive straight into it. And I think we all know, and we've seen examples, and there's plenty of episodes in the archives about when things do go well. But what about when the owner and manager relationship or the way things work together don't happen well? What are the common symptoms, or what are the things people might experience in that situation?
Yeah, this is a very good question, and we certainly see the symptoms of this a lot. So I'm going to share some of the symptoms that people might feel, and then go back and talk about how common I think this is. So I think the most common thing, Sachin, will be things like open loops that kind of disappear, that not only do they not get closed, but they just kind of disappear from the conversation. You kind of have that vague recollection that we've had this conversation before. I'm sure this was something that you said you were going to do, or I said I was going to do, and it's kind of disappeared. Uncertain accountability. So you sort of coming back to, is it something you're doing? Is it a bit I'm doing? Or are there multiple bits involved? Who's actually doing that? And then the figures are pointing in lots of different directions. Important meetings getting cancelled or rebooked is a really, really common symptom that you'd experience here. Artificial harmony. So people kind of talking as if they are really close, but actually there's kind of superficial conversations. They don't really ever touch on the things that really need to be talked about. And then the other thing I've got written down here is just talking about the wrong things. So, you know, we all know that we should be talking about the kind of elephant in the room, but we're superficially talking about a couple of areas where we know there's not substantial disagreement. And back to the point at the start, I think we should imagine this as like a bell curve. And so, you know, there's only a very small percentage of owners and PMs where the relationship is in that top 2.5 to 5% of people where they perform really well. I mean, we get to work with a lot of them in Project X. And then the other thing to think about is wherever you start on that bell curve, your job is to push it to the right, to just elevate the performance over time. And that's what we're going to cover off in this session, exactly what you need to be thinking about and how you can do that.
Cool. So I think just when you're sort of detailing those, I've experienced quite a few of these, and I might just share how I felt, just to make sure we're talking about the same thing. The open loops thing is, you know, you come out of a meeting, it feels clear. Yeah, you know, we talked about this thing, we talked about that thing, and then maybe a few weeks later, you come back and the conversation happens again, and then you find yourself second guessing. I thought we'd talked about that. I thought that was going to be like dealt with, but it never was. And then the same problem happens again. You have the same conversation, the decision's made, and then the same thing happens again. Is that the sort of thing you mean?
Yeah. So I think it happens in two ways. Like you mentioned, sometimes you're coming back and talking about things where a decision has already been made. And that can sort of fall under politics a little bit. It usually says the other side potentially is not happy with the decision made. And so there was a lack of alignment around that agreed position or course of action. And then the other thing is where things just disappear that were either uncomfortable or the person didn't really think they should be doing anyway. And so they drop off the list that you're watching, and then you're quite sure you've talked about it, and you're sort of thinking, dude, I know we've talked about this. What was our agreement? What was the plan? And you're just kind of circling around the same stuff again and again. And it can really feel like Groundhog Day. You're stuck on the same things without any real resolution or progress.
Absolutely. And I think in that situation, I've often found myself when I've been in that in the past, sort of questioning myself, like, am I going mad? I thought we'd sorted this out. And you feel confused and just a bit, yeah, it's just very disconcerting when that happens.
Yeah, you're just feeling like, am I being gaslit here? What's happening?
The other one, just from what you talked about, was the meetings. That's the other one I've seen commonly, where it starts off, with plausible, urgent things that seem to mean the meeting has to change, and then it sort of becomes any reason not to have the meeting or to have the discussion. Is that what you mean there?
Yeah, so there are a lot of things in general practice that are urgent and important things. So I think in terms of a list of excuses for why you might need to cancel a meeting, it's a long list of things. And so it can be really easy for somebody else potentially to take over your calendar and reschedule. And the most common thing would be patient appointments. You're doing that rather than seeing patients. And sometimes the other way around as well. People themselves who are in a leadership position. So an owner may also not take meetings seriously and continually reschedule, not attend, show up late, show up unprepared, haven't done their thinking in advance. They're sending a message that they don't value the time in that meeting with that person. And so what happens is there's a shared reduced commitment to the meeting even happening. And then before you know it, people go 3 months or maybe longer. They haven't actually had any meaningful catch-ups. And so then, in my experience, what they resort to is managing by email. So they start emailing and messaging and texting each other, sometimes at all hours of day or night, which is a different problem again. But you end up with just text-based communication rather than the nuance of in-person communication, or it could be a digital version like Zoom. But you're going for a very, very inferior product in text only, because people are usually giving insufficient context and probably just are shopping the answer that they want. And so you end up with this outcome where there's much, much reduced alignment and very much reduced clarity over what exactly we're doing and what our priorities are. But this is a really common thing that we see when we talk to owners when they want to enter Project X. They're talking through where they're currently at. This is one of the common things that we see.
Yeah. And the other way of dealing with it, if it's not by text or email, is where between every consultation, there's some sort of quick fire decision made. You're sort of sitting there about to do your notes, and then
the doorstop, the foot in the door.
Just before you see the next patient, can we spend 200 grand on this?
Yeah. Yeah. Or, hey, I've got that problem with this receptionist again. They've come in late. Do you think I should dismiss them? Something that requires a much more detailed briefing. And we're kind of making decisions about things. And as well as I do, that there are a lot of issues around that. There's task switching. You need a different brain for consulting than you do for leading your business. And so you're being forced to switch between tasks that are very different and make decisions about things with insufficient information, very low context. And you don't even really have a way of auditing the fact that you've made this decision or what the actual decision was, because if it's a poor briefing, odds are you've kind of signed yourself up to something that is much bigger than what you really understood. And then later on, it's really easy to say somebody say, hey, I told you all about that. You're like, I don't really remember that conversation, but it could have been one of those doorstop kind of things where it was very brief and you were forced into making a decision because something was on fire that was completely predictable.
Yeah, I remember years ago, I think I've talked about this before, but I found that really difficult in between consults. So we'd agreed a management time, a leadership time, etc. And then the person I was working with at the time came in between consults. They hadn't done one particular thing that they were supposed to have done, and then told me in the middle of that little gap, no, I've done it. And I said, well, it's been reported to me clearly by the person on the receiving end, it's not been done. And so I think we need to have a discussion after as to why there's a difference between your version of done and their version of done. I'm happy to have that when we have appropriate time. Anyway, that person, a manager in the organization, walked out of the practice. That was almost the exact words I told you. Walked out of the practice, put in a work cover claim, said they were being bullied and harassed. That was incredibly stressful. Very frustrating. And so I think we're clear now on what the problems are and how they show up. You got 15, 20 minutes, Todd. Let's just solve it.
All right. Easy, Sachin. The first thing is, let me ask you a question. If we're going to have a weekly meeting for alignment and you and I work in a team, what's your preference for duration of meeting, time of day, and day of week? So let's maybe get some agreement on that first.
Yeah. So there's probably a couple of other bits first. It probably has to be non-negotiable, like protected time. I think that's super important. I know you and I differ on this. I don't mind what time of day. My preference is early in the week, just so that there's the rest of the week to work on things. Not a big fan of Thursday, Friday meetings because weekend comes and everyone forgets. And so the way you and I do it, we do, same page meeting. I like 45 to 60 minutes. I like no agenda, but with an agenda, if that makes sense. So there's a process, but actually all the things on the mind are put out. We call it the same page meeting. And then the priority things discussed in sequence. So yeah, I think the keys for me are that it has to happen on a regular cadence. It has to happen when we say it's going to happen. And there's very limited reasons that it shouldn't go ahead. Normally, it should probably only not go ahead if there's a annual leave or something like that. But otherwise, it should just happen. And then it's the cadence and the repetition that's the key. And then the process of how you handle each of the items that are discussed and what arises out of that and who's doing what and how it's being done. And then you just document it. It doesn't have to be complex, but it should just flow on. So it should just be the same set of documentation week after week. You tell me.
Yeah, I agree with everything you're saying. So I prefer them earlier in the week because, number one, you have got time to address and ideally close things out within the same week, particularly your to-do list. The second thing is you want to have people fresh. So I prefer morning, and I prefer, particularly when you've got a consulting owner, I prefer that this is a before starting with patients thing because it's really easy to run over. So one of the reasons meetings get binned is the doctor was running late. And so what we don't want is a tired PM and a tired owner at the end of the day trying to make decisions. And remember, there's that hungry, angry, late tired, the halt to think about. And there's been really good research done on this. Between 2 and 4 p.m. is a real drop in cognitive processing power. That's been shown up by some of the work of Daniel Pink in the research he's done. And so we don't really want to pick an important meeting to happen at a time that is a natural drop in your capacity to think. So I like first thing in the morning. I don't love the Monday mornings just because Monday morning is often a hectic time anyway. And so it might be that it's, say, a Tuesday or a Wednesday in the morning before consulting begins and before the kind of chaos of the day might impact the PM. You really need to go in there with a really clear and open mind. And so first thing in the morning is good. I think you're right, 45 minutes, 60 minutes. I'd have a hard end at 60 minutes. So you never, ever extend the meeting because what can happen is that can make the meetings unattractive and you're just trying to do too many things in the 45 to 60 minute block of time that you have. So that would be the first thing. And then what I would do is just use a tool to record the meeting. You said, Sachin, make sure you got appropriate notes. Well, there's a good way of outsourcing that now. And there are a lot of different note-taking tools that people could use that just record and then allocate the actions at the end as well as the projects. Make sure that you arrive prepared with the right data. That's particularly from the PM side, so that you're using verified data in the meeting. And then the other thing that's probably important to make sure that you're doing is that you are the purpose of the regular meeting, and we recommend these are weekly, at least at the start. If everything's going super well in the business, you might make them fortnightly. Believe it or not, it is harder to turn up to a fortnightly meeting than a weekly meeting. And so you're probably better just to run weekly meetings, even if you finish them, in 30 or 40 minutes, rather than have a jam-packed 1 hour meeting that runs over every 2 weeks. And so I would still prefer that you have a weekly cadence. You just know that day, that thing always happens. Make it one of your leadership metrics that you must have that happen every week. And if it doesn't, then that's a breach of your standards. And you need to talk about why that's happened. Make sure that you rectify it. The other type of meeting that an owner and a PM should be having is a one-to-one coaching session, which is about momentum coaching, just helping that person make progress and work on their mindset their actions, their behaviors, and their beliefs that help them move to playing the game at a higher level. That's a framework we use in Project X, and I'm not going to share any more on that now or any more on the same page meeting, other than to say those two meetings should do most of the heavy lifting. And then, Sachin, as a consequence of the regular meeting cadence, I'm going to propose something that might be a little bit outrageous. Are you ready for it?
I think I know what it might be. I'm just guessing, but go.
All right, give me a guess and then we can check.
I'm thinking if we've got this in the diary every week, then each of us has to get disciplined at capturing our thoughts. And so we're not at the firing off emails and text messages left, right, center. And we need to capture it in our own place and bring it to that meeting so that we can each work uninterrupted, barring catastrophic or crazy urgent things, which isn't much really. Those things we just need to develop a bit of muscle and discipline around keeping it. That's what I would be thinking, but tell me.
100%. Number one, the first rule is NFE, no fucking emails. No fucking emails ever. So do not email each other about anything to do with leading the practice. The only exception to that would be where there's been email used to, say reach some kind of a collaboration with somebody externally, or potentially a service offering or something that on sharing the email is the goal. But I don't ever want you to originate an email around leadership, because what I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to get you to lean in here, because no good news comes by email. Nothing, ever. Whenever you open up your emails, you would mostly be thinking there is likely different sized hand grenades in there, and it's just a lot of stuff that is unpleasant to read. And so stay out of your emails, because if you're getting there to send someone an email, odds are you're going to read something else, and it's going to probably annoy you and affect your ability to follow through on your day. So NFE, don't send them. That means you're going to find some other channel to communicate asynchronously between the meetings, and ideally just capture what you said, Sachin. So you got things in your head, something's bothering you, you just want to kind of download it, get it out of your head somewhere. Look, I really like to choose a platform that is not part of your social platforms. So people like to use Messenger, WhatsApp, things like that. Look, if you use Messenger or WhatsApp as part of your social activities, you message friends there, I wouldn't use that, because the problem is that you're in there and you're likely to be tempted to look at something out of hours. So what we want is a container that is perfectly designed to fit a 9 to 5 kind of vibe. And if there was an emergency, that there's some kind of communication that in case of emergency, you break glass, then that should be something else. And it's probably just phoning the person, but something has to be on fire, or somebody has experienced significant blood loss before you do that. Everything else should be able to be managed by the person that is in that role. And what I love for this is Slack. The reason I love Slack is even the free version, you can have multiple channels. So you can easily corral the message between the right people. You can do a voice note, you can do a video, you can upload a document, you could just type a message. There's so many different ways of communicating. You could just send a GIF if you want to. And, you could basically just put whatever your thoughts are down in that channel, and then the other person will get to it when it suits them. That is why I prefer that as a channel. So those are probably my main tips. So lock down the time, NFE, get all of your thinking out on the problems. And then when you get to your session, just be clear on which 2 or 3 issues you're going to try and work through. Don't do any more than that. 1 or 2 issues is the ideal number. It might just be one big issue that you resolve. And if you resolve 1 issue a week, within a year, you're going to make some really, really big progress. Trying to solve 3, 4, or 5 issues a week, you're actually going to make less progress over the year, because you're going to find that most of those don't actually get resolved. And the other thing that kind of comes from this is that you will get a new approach to the way that you work on solving the problems in between the messages. So what I mean by that is you're going to need to have a mechanism for trusting that the person who's in charge is just going to follow through and make some decisions, rather than knocking on your door to get your permission to make a decision all the time. And so that largely comes back to the vast majority of problems that we solve in practice are around reversible decisions. So most of them, they're type 1 and type 2 problems. So type 1 being the ones that are irreversible. agreeing to a new lease or agreeing to take on a new doctor, signing the really big things. And then a lot of the other stuff is easily able to be reversed later. And so that's the challenge, is just to be clear on which are the boundaries around decision making and just let people make decisions. And it is okay if they need to be reversed later. That's much better than you being interrupted regularly for low-grade decisions that you're never going to have the full context on anyway. And it helps to build some trust. And so if there are issues or decisions that you need to cover over in that same page meeting, then you would do that.
Cool. So now we've got meetings organized. They're never moved, so they don't get kicked down the road. We've got less emails, less sort of noise and chatter in between. So we've got a bit of a rhythm. What's the next step?
I think the next thing, Sachin, is we really need to work on elevating trust. So if we think about Lencioni's pyramid of high-performing teams, with effective teams, trust is the foundation layer. Then above trust is conflict, and healthy conflict, task conflict, not people conflict. And then we want to get to commitment. So people, when they commit to following through on tasks and objectives, that they stay committed to those. Above commitment is accountability, and then above that is results. And so often you need to do some work on trust. And the reason for that is that medicine, unfortunately, rewards you for being right, and it punishes you for being wrong. And so in the consulting room, you have a bias towards being right, and you wouldn't often encourage yourself being wrong or requiring kind of remedial action. And so the challenge here is that is not a useful mindset to bring into a meeting or leadership at all. And so we do want to encourage the sharing of obstacles and problems. And the way that you can help to get to this is sometimes people will kind of obtusely allude to something and not go right into some detail. And so you need to be 100% tuned in for the meeting. You should have no distractions. And it's really important if you pick up a cue that you say, tell me more about that, or can I get a fuller briefing on that, or what else? Just some questions that go through the normal layers that are there. That's really, really useful. And then the other thing that I like around building trust, this may sound counter to that, but when you're in a meeting and somebody says, yeah, that's done, or this is how I've approached it, it's really useful to pause and say, can you show me that? So the context for this session is I have had problems with taking things at face value in the past. And what I mean by that is somebody said that they've done something and I've just assumed that that's true. One really serious example of this was somebody that said they paid for insurances when in fact they hadn't. And the one question I could have asked when I asked if it was done is I should have said, can you show me that? Now, typically when you say, can you show me that, it's common if somebody hasn't actually done it to start with some excuses. And I'm going to ask you, what do you think of the kind of excuses that come back when it hasn't been done?
I can't find it at the moment, or I'll get it back to you after, or I haven't scanned it yet, so I just need to scan it, or that type of thing.
Yeah, the kind of attempts at fobbing you off. And so usually what I would say is I can wait, and just say, I'll wait. And I stop talking until the information is produced, because if it takes 5 or 10 minutes, there are two outcomes from this. The first is that it's all done and that person produces the verification, in which case you're both comfortable and that loop is neatly closed. That's the ideal outcome. Unfortunately, the more likely outcome, when you kind of get the snow job, where people are kind of trying to misdirect you, is that it actually hasn't been done. And that can be for two reasons. One is it can be benign. So people often have a bias to optimism. And so they're thinking, I've done 80% of it. It's pretty well done. All I need to do is the last 2 hours. Now, unfortunately, work can remain in that state for almost ever. And so you want to know if it requires 2 hours, then you can work with the person to free up the time and remove the obstacles to them finishing the work. So that's actually a really good conversation. And then the remaining version is where it is maliciously being obstructed. And that's a very different conversation. But also very important for you to know if somebody is kind of just, spreading BS around in the meetings, when really what you want is honesty. The next thing that's important is when somebody declares that they're off track or something hasn't been done, they must not be crucified. So that's a private conversation, because you can't blame people for bringing things up that are a problem if indeed, when they do that, they're publicly executed. And I remember, I can't remember which book this was in, but Alan Mulally took over as CEO of Ford Motor Company at a time that it had been, smashed and was in a really bad way. And you can imagine how much the higher level execs are paid there. And he ran a similar process to this. So he would just say who's on track or off track. And so basically people would present their slides on the projects that they're accountable for, and they were all being presented as green. Every single person in the senior executive team was presenting all of their projects as green all the time. He just kept saying, I find it hard to believe that everything is on track when as an organization, we are off track. We are failing badly based on our financial metrics, based on everything else. It took him quite a few weeks before somebody produced one red slide that said this is off track. And then it took another couple of weeks before other people were comfortable confessing that they were off track. And what had to happen was they had to see one person confess and not be executed, i.e. not be sacked from the business, before they were comfortable actually bringing theirs forward. And then lo and behold, over the next sort of 4 to 6 weeks, a ton of stuff came out that was off track. But it was just that the prior leadership had been such that anybody who shared news that was not desirable or perceived as undesirable was cut off at the neck, and their role was filled. And so the willingness for people to step into that was not high. So we do need to create an environment whereby you can share problems and ideally share them early. We want to know about something when we have time to correct it, not, I should have told you about this 3 months ago. So in a consult, I liken this to the GP. You got a patient coming in that's got a serious diagnosis, let's pretend it's cancer, and that person also happens to be 10 kilograms above their ideal weight. You could not imagine in that consultation focusing the whole consultation on the person's mild excess weight and not telling them about the cancer at all, because you didn't really want to break the bad news. You know that sooner or later you're going to have to break that bad news. And it's a lot like that in these business meetings. You just need to get the bad stuff out early. And I remember you did a session with Raul, your eldest, on this public video on eating the frog, just telling the bad news up front, being comfortable with sharing the truth. And again, this is one of your favorite sayings, progress begins with the truth. And so you just want to hear that up front. This is off track. I haven't done it. And then we can all get to helping to resource that appropriately, rather than artificial harmony created by talking about the wrong things. That's probably the biggest bit of work, Sachin, until you're comfortable you're talking about the right stuff. You'll probably have some things to share on that as well.
Yeah, I think the main thing there is that sometimes we can be confused, or others in our teams can be confused as to who their primary duty is, or what's their primary purpose. Is it to please the owner by telling them what you think they want to hear? Or is it actually to an outcome? And I think for all of us, it's actually to an outcome. It should be. And so in service of the outcome, you have to discuss the obstacles and the problems with getting there. And, any outcome that's worth achieving, there will be obstacles in the way. That's normal. And some of them you'll have the tools and resources to overcome. Some you may not. And that's where the collective wisdom of a team gets involved to help one another. It's normal. But it can feel like it's not normal that there are obstacles in the way. Well, there are 100% going to be obstacles in the way. And just being aware of that, having those open discussions, and then addressing it directly in good time. I think that's the important thing. The one that's not so forgivable is when people know it's off track, don't declare it, and then at the deadline or near the deadline, suddenly reveal that there's been little or zero progress because they're scared of that. And I understand it all comes from wanting to please others, but the reality is when you try not to upset people because you want to please them, that's the very behavior that will lead you to 100% piss people off.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the issue here, right? Is that we, in having a perverse objective of pleasing people, you end up with the 100% guaranteed outcome of displeasing everyone, including yourself. And so prompt announcement of obstacles is super, super important here. and will make an enormous difference to the performance of your team. So building that layer of trust to then get to having appropriate task conflict. So not conflict around people or beliefs or personal values, but rather conflict around the strategy that you apply and the tactics that you apply. And ultimately, I think this is something where Project X members are really good at. For the vast majority of these things, Sachin, I think the reality is we don't actually know how something's going to work before it's tested. And so rather than having a really, long debate about something, you can do a really quick calibration around how strongly you feel about the course of action. My preference is a score out of 10. So you say, how strongly are you committed to this course of action? And somebody might be a 5 and somebody might be an 8, in which case you say, okay, well, let's just go with your approach first. And then if we need to recalibrate, we need to try again, we'll do that and we'll review things. It's super important you don't come back with any I told you so's, or even the other side of that, which is you were right, Sachin, again, or, much as that might be true, it's really important not to personalize this because we are running experiments all the time. And so if you meet a Project X member in the wild, they have some certain language that they use that makes them stand out amongst other owners. And I'm running an experiment would be one of the most common things that we hear from our audience, where they're doing things that they accept, they don't know how it's going to work. And so when they call it an experiment, the hurdle to action is much lower for them as well as the rest of the team, because they're thinking, well, it is only an experiment. It's not a new course of action that if it fails, we're going to be in trouble. And so running an experiment is a really good way to get around that. You just got to be really clear on what your objective is and what your measurables are, so you can tell, did you achieve the outcome that you desired or not?
Nice. So we've covered the importance of dedicated time, a dedicated rhythm, NFE, so no fucking emails. Then we've talked about the importance of trust and vulnerability, and making a safe environment so people can ask for help. And then we've talked about, in this setting, the importance of obstacles and declaring them early and having a focus on outcome over pleasing. Anything else we should be considering?
Yeah, I reckon there's one tiny little improvement hack to add to the end of things, particularly when you're an owner running the meeting. Rather than asking for feedback, which by definition is a critique of what you've just done, I would, at the end of the meeting, just say to your PM, do you have any advice for me? And they might say, what do you mean? Say, is there 1, 2, or maybe 3 things you could share with me as to how I could run this meeting better in the future? That is a much lower hurdle for them to share what they're thinking. And then you have the opportunity to take that feedback and reinvest that each week in how you run the meeting. And you might make some notes about how you come into the meeting. And you should include getting in a resourceful state before the meeting and preparing, getting the space organized, including this space, the physical space. And then I think that's probably the only little hack that is worth adding to this. The rest of it, the more nuanced parts are part of Project X, but I think this will help a lot of people in elevating the performance of the alignment between the owner and the PM.
Awesome. So today we've covered exactly how we can make significant progress on one of the key relationships in running a practice, that between owner and manager. It's something we need to constantly work on to improve and elevate. It's never done, but it can certainly be brought to a much higher level just by implementing the things that Todd shared today. So Todd, thank you for your wisdom.
Thanks, Sachin.
We'll see you next time.